Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Twice a week we talk about success, property investment, money, and today I want to share with you 7 money tips to help supercharge your finances. So it's not really going to be a property episode, but boy, it's going to relate to property and building your wealth over time. You see, I believe becoming financially fluent would be the best gift you can give yourself. The challenge is, who do you listen to? Who do you get advice from? That's why in my daily blog, Property Update, I give a lot of financial general discussion as well about helping you become financially fluent, and that's why we have these sort of episodes on the podcast. Interestingly, I've found that getting sound, impartial financial advice along your journey to wealth is not a cost, it's an investment. I found it interesting that all the wealthy people I know have got advisors and are happy to pay for them, while the average Australian gets their financial advice from Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and even podcasts like this. So despite that disclaimer, today I do want to share with you 7 money tips to supercharge your finance. Let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
The maths behind financial independence is actually pretty simple. But if that's the case, why do so few Australians achieve financial freedom? And it's not because of the lack of knowledge. There are so many money blogs, videos, podcasts out there. Instead, I think it's a combination of mindset, habits, and behaviours that rule our financial destiny. So today, I'd like to discuss 7 tips that could make you rich with Brett Warren, National Director of Property Strategy at Metropole. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you. Yeah, look, it's really interesting, isn't it? I often hear you say that creating wealth is simple, but it's not easy because there's so many little things and little pieces. And I always used to think that, I guess, to become wealthy or rich, you'd have to do something significant. It'd be a big flip of a property or a winning lotto or something like that. But it's actually a series of small little steps and events. And maybe we can unpack some of that with our 7 tips today.
I think that's a great idea. I think it's much the same when people start investing in property. There are so many things to think about. They think they've got to know 100 things, a million things so they don't get involved, when really there are 4 or 5 basic principles, fundamentals that don't change over the long term that you've got to get a handle on. And then the rest are maybe a bit of icing on the cake.
Yeah, good point. Or you could just know one thing and you could know who to ask those things to, who know the 100 things, right?
Hey, it's not who you know, it's who you know knows. Well said. Thank you. Okay, well, you came up with a list of things in your reading, so maybe you could go through these tips and then let's have a chat about them.
Yeah, look, I don't want to get too deep to start with, Michael, but I know Bill Gates, the self-made billionaire, he's probably more into philanthropy and helping people now. One of his quotes is, if you were born poor, it's not your fault, but if you die poor, if you stay poor, it's your mistake. So I think there's a lot of people, and again, without getting too deep, that have kind of grown up in the poor or the middle class. They don't actually know how to get wealthy or where to start or what to do. I guess that's a big problem for a lot of people, isn't it?
Well, I think what he's saying is you have to take responsibility for your financial future. Warren Buffett said that, in fact, his success has a lot to do with where he was born and when he was born. In other words, if he was born in Africa 100 years ago, he wouldn't have been able to buy all these great stocks, no matter how clever an investor he was. So for people listening to this podcast, the vast majority in Australia, they're living in the best country in the world, arguably the best time in history. So therefore, yes, I think Bill Gates' comment says that you've got to take responsibility. You've got to become financially literate. The problem is that who do you learn from? I mean, most of us learn from our parents have learned from their parents, but there are so many blogs, so many podcasts now. The challenge is understanding who to listen to, Brett, because everyone seems to be a guru today.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And it always seems so easy. There's always that short-term hook as well. And look, I think that the first place to start with that, if I can speak from my own experience, Michael, is, look, I didn't grow up in a wealthy background. I probably grew up in a middle-class background. But I guess it's to find, someone who's come from where you've come from, the middle class or the being poor or disaster and kind of hitch your wagon to them. I know 20 years ago, Michael, my wife pointed at a picture in the API magazine and suggested we go and listen to you at a seminar. And I thought, what could this guy possibly talk to me and help me with? And ever since then, I've understood the principles. I've hitched my wagon to what you've done. I've learnt the lessons you've learnt. So I think having a mentor and becoming financially literate and working with someone who's been in your situation and overcome those odds is a really great place to start.
Well, interestingly, if I look back at my history, my parents were migrants, and interestingly, all their friends were. I came to Australia at the age of 3, and my parents were workers. They didn't know any different, didn't know any better. But most of my parents' friends, who happened to be my friends' parents, they were in business. My father was too scared to be in business. A lot of them were in the clothing manufacturing industry, shoe industry. I remember their best friends when we were still making things in Australia, and they invested in real estate. They had cars, we didn't. They went on holidays at Christmas time and we couldn't afford to. So there wasn't books, there wasn't podcasts, there wasn't blogs then, but I actually saw what other people did. And that's when I decided, hey, they didn't teach me how to do it. Even though I do remember sitting at Laurie's place one day when I asked his mum a bit about the share market, because there was all this stuff there and I didn't understand what dividends and yields and earnings were. So you have to learn from somebody. Be careful who you do. I think the other mistake today, though, Brett, with the instant gratification world of social media is becoming wealthy is a long journey and it's not easy. But then again, why should it be easy? If it was easy, the rewards wouldn't be so great, would they?
That's a really good point. Moving on to our second tip is don't follow the herd. Each of us are hardwired by, I guess, evolution to be part of a herd and to level of safety when you're in a herd, particularly if you're out hunting and looking for predators and facing danger and things like that as well. So staying with a herd can actually be beneficial, but that's not really the way it works with money and building financial freedom, is it, Michael? You don't want to be average, because if you follow the crowd, you're probably going to end up average yourself. However, if you can kind of break away from the crowd and work out what they're doing differently and do something differently, you've got a greater chance of succeeding.
Well, we keep mentioning the statistic that of the 2 million property investors in Australia, less than 200,000 end up owning 6 or more properties. Less than 1% of property investors become financially free. Most actually sell up over the first 5 years anyway. So, no, you shouldn't do what most others do. So part of that's emotional, though. You get carried away during booms, and at the other extreme, like some people are at the moment, they're nervous during more difficult times because the herd is suggesting, it's not a good time to get involved.
Warren Buffett says it quite well, doesn't he? Be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And I think for about the fifth time this week, Michael, I've seen an article suggesting that the Melbourne property market's in turmoil and it's never going to bounce back, and the doom and gloom, and that could be a contrary argument for what we're kind of thinking about those particular markets. So it does take a level of, I guess, bravery and courage to go against the grain and actually break away from the herd.
It takes a leap of faith to do that because it's comfortable in your comfort zone. Currently with the Melbourne property market, I was actually just having a chat with Dr. Nicola Powell, Chief Economist of Domain, for another podcast recording, and I was reminding her that when you and I first started working together in Brisbane, there was a really long period of time, over a decade, where Brisbane's property market more than underperformed. It hardly did anything at all. Even though we didn't buy the Brisbane market, we bought selective properties that outperformed averages. But look what the market has done in the last decade or so. And it's much the same in Melbourne. It's going through a period of time at the moment that I haven't seen since the early 90s, Brett. We had a property boom when I first started investing, and since the Australian Bureau of Statistics looked at figures in the 80s, Melbourne's property market grew on average about 8.4% per annum for a decade. And then in the early 90s, we had the recession we had to have, and everyone left Victoria. Actually, a little bit like now. People were leaving, and there was a joke, the last person to leave Victoria, please turn the lights out. And the property market for 6-7 years did nothing. And then in 97, the next property cycle moved on, and Melbourne outperformed, and on average, it's done better than any of the other markets. So you're right. You actually got to be able to work against the herd. We're not saying time the market, but the worst time to buy is when it's been booming for 5 years or 3 years.
I guess the other thing as well is actually the herd are predictable, right? So maybe you can use the herd to your favour, and investing. And you always say, don't fight the big trends, don't fight the big gorillas. If certain people are moving to certain locations, Melbourne's an international city. It's not a mining town or a regional town where mining's gone away or something unordinary's happened and not going to return. Those long-term fundamentals are still in place. The herd is still going to want to live in our capital cities, close to restaurants and cafes and great school catchments and public transport and infrastructure. So that's not going to change. And understanding that and maybe using the herd to your favour could be a good point there as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Of course, when the herd eventually gets going again in Melbourne, when interest rates drop, when finance becomes a bit easier, when they keep hearing that the market's moved to the next level. The market's moved to the next level because our clients and other smart strategic investors have moved it to the next level and they've missed the bottom, just like a lot of people did before. Now, we're not suggesting Melbourne's the only place to invest. I think your comment is that don't follow the herd.
Correct. Point 3, look, we always start out with the end in mind, but I guess another way of saying it is really understand how many months or years you have left in your wealth window. How much, if you're 45, you've realistically got another 20, 22 years. If you're 50, you've potentially only got another 10 or 15 years where you're actually working and building that wealth, but there's some time after that where you can use leverage and super as well. So I guess the first step's really understanding that and understanding how much you're going to earn in that time. So if you're earning $100,000 a year for the next 15 years, that's $1.5 million passing through your hands. So the big question is, how much of this can you keep? And also, how much of this can you use to build and create longer-term wealth, right?
Well, I think property investors have two machines to help them grow their wealth. They need a cash machine and they also need a capital growth machine. Now, the cash machine is often your job, your profession, your business that brings cash in that you need to pay your bills, need to pay the mortgages, pay the school fees, but you also have to keep a portion of it so that you can invest it, or save it, invest it, and then build a capital growth machine that will, in the long term, be your cash machine. And one doesn't work without the other, because what I think you're saying is that your job cash machine, your window of earnings, is going to disappear one day. And it may be because you choose it to, because you retire. But boy, Brett, unfortunately, we've seen a few people in the last couple of years, people we know very well, who, for no fault of their own, because of illness, health issues, accidents, their cash machine instantly dried up. And unfortunately, even the insurance didn't cover it sufficiently. So you've got to protect yourself. But I guess what I'm adding to your concept is your wealth window. Use that to save and invest, understand how long you've got. And that's, I think, part of the reason that at Metropole, even before we talk about properties, we actually put these numbers and figures into a very detailed program to get an idea of what's likely, what's feasible, what's possible. Because I know a lot of people come to us with unrealistic expectations, hope in 10, 15 years' time they're going to have a very significant asset base that'll give them a cash machine. Others actually do the opposite. They don't realise how big their potential is.
Yeah. Look, I think Tom Corley's got a wealth equation there where you allocate certain resources to different areas, but if you're allocating 10 or 20% to savings and also investing, and I guess the good thing about the software we use, it actually shows you those buckets. It shows you what you're saving. It shows you what you should be investing and gives you a rough idea. And if you can stick to that and use your money strategically and then use the power of time for compounding, it's going to make life a lot easier in the long run, isn't it?
Yes. Now, I sometimes, when I speak with clients, say, what's your biggest asset? And they think it's a trick question. So they say my wife or my husband or my kids. And I say, okay, yeah, I'm forgetting that one. And they talk about 27 Smith Street. And I said, no, it's actually your income earning capacity over your wealth window, the word you just used. Your financial future depends on the balance between enjoying your money now and planning for then, doesn't it?
Certainly does. Something you touched on before is practicing delayed gratification. So I think that's number 4 for us. Something I wrote about was actually practicing delayed gratification. If you want more money and freedom in your life, you're going to have to practice delayed gratification. Successful people have higher patience levels. They can postpone enjoyment. And they often reverse engineer. They start out with a bigger goal and what they want to achieve, and they can actually work backwards. And they're willing to work hard enough to get it, but they're also willing to update their mindset, change their thermostat, and really help themselves independently learning to delay the gratification and learning what it takes to get to that next level. Isn't that right?
Look, that's true. If you do the hard things now, hopefully you're going to have a much easier life later. If you do the easy things now, it's very likely you are going to have a harder life later. So you've got to learn delayed gratification, which is so much harder today with just the opportunity of, I almost got sucked in on Instagram a couple of days ago. I was looking at something and I was given the opportunity to buy something at 50% off. Really? Okay. So I clicked on the thing and then this spinning wheel came around and it gave me 100% off just to capture my names. Now, fortunately, I didn't go to the next level, but it is so easy to get sucked into this. One of the things I've learned ages ago is if I want something, I can afford it, by the way, today. So when you get to the point that Pam and I are, I really, how many more years have I got? I don't have to delay gratification, but I still don't want to be taken in by instant gratification. So sometimes a good trick is to leave something in your shopping cart online, and if you really still want it tomorrow, then you can click go ahead and get it. Having said that, I'm not too good at delayed gratification today, Brett. You know that. But the way I got to where I am is because I was, and I was able to. Even when I first started, people didn't call it a gap year, but many of my friends went overseas, took a year's holiday, and I was in too much of a hurry to get going and start earning money.
Yeah. Look, I guess looking back over time, I mean, is it getting harder for people to practice delayed gratification? And you can tell your side of the story, Michael. But I know when I was younger and my parents went out for the night or something, I'd actually have to cook my own dinner. I couldn't just jump on Uber Eats and McDonald's rock up 5 minutes later. If I want to buy a record or a CD or a tape, I'd actually have to go to the music store and get it. Now you can download it straight away. So I'm sure. It's the same for generations, but is it harder to practice that today for this generation?
Clearly it is. But I think one of the things we've noticed with people, the successful clients we work with at Metropole, is they actually, first of all, they have delayed gratification, but they also think much further out into the future. So while the average Australian wonders what they're going to do this weekend, how they're going to get through the week to enjoy the weekend, and most investors wonder what's going to happen to interest rates next month or next year or in 3 months' time, the wealthy people are really thinking 10, 15, 20 years into the future. By doing that, it helps you understand if that's where I want to be, this is what I've got to do to get there. So while the poor think about the moment and they can't wait for their pay to hit their account at the end of the week, and the middle class are hoping to get through the month, the wealthy people are planning not just for their future, but actually for their kids and their grandkids. A lot of our clients talk about intergenerational wealth, don't they?
They certainly do, yeah, absolutely. And it's something that's very important to all of us. Probably reminds me of another Warren Buffett quote while we're talking there, Michael, about wealth being transferred from the impatient to the patient. People are patient who have a longer term goal. They understand the cycles. They get through those cycles, and they're not just chopping and changing every 5 minutes.
Well, again, that's part of the process of planning that we do with our clients. So at Metropole, we're much more than buyer's agents. We help our clients strategically grow safely their wealth and create intergenerational wealth. And by putting numbers and figures together before we even talk about a property, it actually shows them how much they need to put aside, how much is realistic, what they need to be able to buy the properties they need to get to where they want. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't take a year off to have a holiday, have children. All that's got to be put in the software first, and then we can actually decide what is it that you're going to be able to achieve.
Thank you. Yeah, look, tip number 5 is, I guess, with property in particular, don't think you can make money by trading property. Properties are it's an expensive form of investing, isn't it? Because you've got to pay stamp duty and commissions to get in. Then when you get out, you've got to pay a capital gain and things like that as well. So it's quite expensive. And if you're just looking to trade, and I guess it's kind of like a form of gambling, isn't it? You're kind of hoping it's going to work out. You're relying on, influences and things like that as well. And I guess some people think they've got the ability to beat those odds, but history will tell them that they won't. It's probably just their ego getting in the way, because to be honest, Michael, the easiest way for you to make $1 million in the next 10 to 20 years is to buy a good property and hold and wait, rather than trying to flip and change and add things along the way.
Only because with property in particular, there are too many costs involved with stamp duty and capital gains tax. And even though there's people saying you can add value through renovations, and we do that a lot with our clients, but we actually don't recommend they sell because there's not enough margin in it. I'd be sticking to the wealth creation strategies that have always worked rather than taking the risk. Now, we're not suggesting it should only be property. In fact, if anybody says property only or shares only, I'd be running far away. You and I are experts in property, but there's others in our wealth team and financial planning team that discuss other things. So whether it's business, property or shares or whatever, just let compounding work its magic. Don't interrupt the benefit of compounding.
Good point. Borrowing capacity is incredibly difficult at the moment. It's very, very tight. So number 6 is the biggest probably, I guess, negative impact on your borrowing capacity is probably going to be credit card debt. So the first thing you should do, and I've often heard you say, Michael, before you buy a home, before you do that, pay your credit card down, get rid of your credit card debt. The interest is often just too much to bear. You know, a $10,000 or $20,000 credit card limit could impact your borrowing capacity by 3, 4, or even 5 times that mistake. So it can be a huge financial mistake, can't it, carrying credit card debt?
Well, it can. I mean, the theme of our chat today is giving some money tips to supercharge your finances, and finance or property investment's a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. So therefore, you've got to put yourself in the position of making yourself attractive to the banks. And even if you don't use all your credit card limits, the banks will see the fact that you can, and on that basis limit your borrowing capacity. More than that, though, I think the message is don't take on bad debt. Understand that there are 3 types of debt. Bad debt, which is for depreciating assets, necessary debt for your home, which is still an asset but not an income-producing asset. So I've got no issue with borrowing against your home, of course. And then there's what I'd call good debt for appreciating assets, such as residential real estate, and even for some people, a share portfolio. The thing is, you can't leverage it as much in a share portfolio as you can with property. And so if you want to grow your wealth faster using compounding leverage and time, property, in my mind, is the best asset.
Completely agree. You mentioned before that your biggest asset is yourself. So tip number 7 is actually insure yourself. If you had your biggest asset as a house, you would insure it. So why wouldn't you insure yourself, you know, for instances of surprises like cancers and heart attacks and accidents and stuff like that as well along the way? And I know we had a great session with Mark Boris in our recent wealth retreat, Michael, and it probably took a bit of a turn. We were all thinking he was going to talk about finance and wealth, and which he did to some extent. But the big part he also spoke about was understanding the health of who you are and what you do and things, and it's critically important. So understanding that health aspect and insuring yourself for that's important as well, isn't it?
Well, he explained, though, that to be healthy in our world today, you've also got to be wealthy. It gives you access to all sorts of things. Clearly, that was a big focus of his. And you should insure yourself against surprises, as you would your car. But having said that, you hope that your insurance is a total waste of money. I am, at my age now, uninsurable. But when I first was investing in property, I always used to up my life insurance every time I took on a loan for another property, so that if I died, unfortunately I didn't, the life insurance would pay out all my debts so that my wife at the time would have the properties unencumbered and be able to enjoy them rather than have a financial burden. So while we're not licensed or appropriate to give insurance advice, the answer is within our team at Metropole. We've got Metropole Financial Planning, and I wouldn't be buying insurance online. There are so many ways that you can seem to get things cheaper, but when something bad happens, you really want to make sure you've got the right sort of insurance. We keep hearing about people who try to make a claim and they're let down.
Yeah, look, I think it's a good way of looking at it. I know whenever I pay my premiums, it's always, I feel like it's a total waste of money. But as you said, maybe I should start hoping that it absolutely is. And it's good to have that as a fact.
That's right. So I enjoyed having a chat about these things, because normally you and I talk about property. We talk about how our team at Metropole helps clients outperform the markets. But finance is an important part of property, understanding what you can do to put yourself in a better financial position and not be like most Australians who are not financially literate. So, Brett, before we finish off, I know you've actually got a team of wealth strategists and wealth planners at Metropole. how does your team help clients? What could somebody who's listening to this and say, hey, I actually want to understand what I can do, what would you suggest for them?
Well, it's a good point. I think I'll take you back to what I said kind of at the start of the podcast about, not having to know all of this, but actually knowing a couple of people who can bring it all together. And some of these points here, Michael, you and I just instinctively know, and it's the same with property as well. So we've actually got an evidence-based approach. We've got a strategic formula that we can actually work with. And it starts out, as I mentioned, understanding your longer-term goals, what your wealth window is going to look like, so we can accumulate the right kind of assets and have them compound and leverage. We can maximize your borrowing capacity, make sure that you don't have credit card debt and you're using debt strategically rather than for other purposes. And then putting all these little things and support mechanisms in place around it and holding and setting yourself up for the longer term. So we've got these strategies to help you understand that side of things and understand your needs and your goals. And then the plan is to actually model it out and prepare it for you. And then we hand over to our buyer's agents who can actually help execute that plan when the time comes around as well.
So we're much more than buyer's agents. And in fact, it fits in a little bit with what we were talking about, delayed gratification, because most people who come to Metropole ask two questions. Where should I buy and how much are your fees? And in my mind, they're both very superficial conversations. Where should you buy? What's a good investment for you, Brett? At your stage, you're already a successful investor, isn't the same as for me because I'm at a different stage of my life, isn't the same as somebody who's a beginning investor. And because we've got no properties for sale, it really doesn't matter where we recommend people buy. We've got our own on-the-ground team, so they don't fly in and fly out or just look at properties with Facebook. But before we start even doing that, we help people secure their financial future by putting a plan together. And interestingly, the planning process is almost as important as the plan. We always say plan for your plan, not to go to plan, because things always get messed up. There's X factors, things go wrong, but we customize a solution for each client rather than a cookie cutter approach, Brett.
Absolutely. We don't have 1,000 clients that just happen to fit into 1,000 apartments or off the plan house and land packages, do we? It's very individualised. Everyone's got different goals, different timeframes. So it's really important we understand that before we actually get to the property stage.
Sure. So if you'd like to understand what your property options are, I'll leave a link in the show notes, but just go to metropole.com.au and have an obligation-free wealth discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists to see what you can do, because the market is moving on. There are opportunities there. There are still some challenges as well. And in our research department's estimates, probably less than 5% of properties currently on the market are what we'd call investment grade. So be careful what you buy and be careful whose advice you take. Brett, thanks a lot for your chat today. Look forward to chatting again soon, but you and I chat 2 or 3 times a day anyway.
Yeah, we do. But look forward to chatting online again soon.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's Mindset Moment, I want to share with you the money habits that separate the rich from the poor. And in my studies, I've found that most adults start with the same amount of money. They just have a different philosophy. Now, sure, some people inherit money, but most of today's millionaires are self-made. So, as I said, most of us start with the same amount of money. But here's the exciting thought. Why not work full-time in your job and part-time on your fortune? See, most people want to get involved in property investment and do it full-time. Doesn't work that way. Definitely not at the beginning. So I'm suggesting you work full-time on your job and have a part-time job working on building your wealth. And what a feeling you're going to have when you can honestly say, I'm working on becoming wealthy. I'm not just working to pay my bills. When you have a wealth plan, when you have a strategy to get to where you want to go, you're going to be so motivated, you're going to have a hard time going to bed at night because you're going to be so excited that you're working to build wealth for your long-term future, for your financial independence. So indulge me for a moment because I'd like to share with you a simple formula for creating wealth. Here's my thoughts on how the money that you earn should be allocated. And it's what I've learned from one of my mentors, Jim Rohn, who taught me the 70-30 rule, that after you pay your fair share of taxes, you've got to learn to live on 70% of your after-tax income. So they're the necessities in life that you've got to spend money on. But then it's really, really important to look at how you allocate that remaining 30%. And I'm going to propose you allocate it in the following way. I think 30% of the 30%, about 10% of your income, should go to charity. In my mind, charity is a way of giving back to the community and helping those who need assistance. I believe contributing about 10% of your after-tax income is a good amount to strive for. Now, I believe it's also something you've got to learn early because it's easy to do when the amounts are small. It's pretty easy to give $10 when you've got $100. It's considerably harder to give $100,000 when you earn $1 million. Oh, you're probably thinking, if I had $1 million, I'd have no trouble giving away $100,000 to charity. I'm not so sure. $100,000 seems like a lot of money. But if you start early to develop the habit before the big money comes your way, you're very likely to continue it on later in life. That's one of the things wealthy people do that the average person doesn't see they do, and they think wealthy people are greedy and don't look after the community. Many of them do. Now, with the balance of that 30%, in other words, 20% of your income, I think you should be allocating it to savings and investing. It's one of the most exciting parts of your wealth plan because it's going to give you peace of mind knowing that you're preparing for the winters of your life. So that's one of the big differences between the rich and the poor. Poor people spend their money and save what's left, while rich people save their money and spend what's left. If you think about it, go back, 20 years, and two people earn the same amount of money every month, and they've earned the same pay increases over the years. But if one of them had the philosophy of spending all the money and saving what's left, and the other had the philosophy of saving first and investing that money and spending what's left, imagine the difference between those two people today. Today, if you knew both of those, you'd call one poor and you'd call the other wealthy, wouldn't you? So, remember, spend 70% of what you earn on your day-to-day living, what you keep after tax on your day-to-day living, 10% to charity, and the balance you save. And when you've got sufficient savings, then you start investing it in growth assets so that over time you're then going to use the magic of compounding and leverage and time. Day by day, week by week, the results are hardly noticeable. But in 5 years' time, the differences are going to be pronounced. At the end of 10 years, the difference is going to be dramatic. So, as I said, the rich and the poor all start with the same amount of money. They just have a different philosophy. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?